Some people can't even remember the last time they were allowed to fall apart. Not because life stopped hurting, but because somewhere along the way, being strong became a silent requirement. It became identity. It became armor. From an early age, these people learned there was no room for mistakes, for crying, for doubt. They learned that if they didn't hold everything together, everything would collapse. So they swallowed their sadness, froze their fragility, shelved their own pain, and began to wear the mask of strength, the one that smiles while the chest tightens, the one that embraces while no one notices that it too longs to be held. In these cases, strength stopped being a virtue and became a sentence, a role you can't abandon, not even for a second, because the fear of disappointing, of seeming weak, or of being left behind is stronger than any exhaustion. The armor of the strong looks beautiful on the outside. Steady gaze, controlled voice, confident steps, but it's also a prison no one sees, a prison where crying feels forbidden, and to allow yourself to fail feels like betraying the image you fought so hard to build. Often these people don't even realize how exhausted they are. They just keep going. They pile up responsibilities, put out emotional fires for others, take care of those who never return the favor, and answer "I'm fine" even when everything inside is screaming for help. The strength that was once necessary to survive has become mandatory, as if unlearning how to feel were a prerequisite for keeping everyone else stable. And when, by chance, this person dares to show vulnerability, when they say, "I'm not okay," the world reacts strangely. Friends don't know how to respond. Family gets scared, and instead of support, what often comes is judgment, shock, or silence. This reinforces the idea that being strong isn't a choice, it's an obligation. Once you've become everyone's support, it's as if you've lost the right to fall apart. But this isn't strength, it's emotional isolation. It's a kind of loneliness that isn't shouted, that isn't posted, but that quietly corrodes from within, day after day. Because there is nothing lonelier than being the pillar that holds up everyone else, except yourself. And the cruelest part of this dynamic is that in the eyes of others, you're the one who always has it together, the one who's always available, the one who fixes, organizes, balances, comforts, endures. And because of that, no one asks if you need anything. No one worries about your pain, because your image is one of someone unbreakable. But no one is unbreakable. Everyone has a limit. And when the only way to be accepted is to appear invulnerable, the cost is your own mental health. The truth is, the strong break too. But when they do, they break in silence. And they break hard. Because they never learned to ask for help before it was too late. If you are this person, the one everyone calls when they need something, the one who listens to everything but has no one to talk to, the one who holds the world without anywhere to lean, know that this is not normal. It's not fair. And above all, it's not sustainable. Being strong all the time is not a sign of maturity. Sometimes it's just a cry for help disguised as efficiency, emotional survival dressed up as competence. And living this way takes a toll that sooner or later comes due. Because you can't support every castle without first taking care of the foundation. And in this case, the foundation is you. Be strong, yes, but never at the cost of your own well-being. True strength is also knowing when you've had enough, when it's time to stop, when you too deserve comfort, listening, care. You don't need to carry the world to be loved. You don't need to swallow everything to be accepted. And you definitely don't need to lose yourself to keep others standing. Strength is not never falling. It's knowing that even when you fall, you are still worthy of love. Behind the habit of always being the strong one in the group, there is almost always a childhood quietly marked by emotional responsibilities that should never have been placed there. These are adults who, as children, learned far too early to listen to their parents' problems, to console younger siblings, to understand unexplained absences, and to interpret silences heavy with tension. They were not necessarily victims of explicit abuse, but they were burdened with invisible expectations. Instead of just being children, they became advisors. Instead of being cared for, they became caregivers. Over time, this turns into a mindset where the only way to feel loved is by being useful, strong, and functional all the time, even if that suffocates their own pain. Psychology calls this phenomenon emotional parentification, when the child switches roles with the adults and begins to behave like a miniature caretaker for everyone around them. This creates a sense of self-worth directly tied to how much they can endure, how much they can give, and how much they can handle without complaining. This structure carries over into adulthood in the form of relationships where the person feels they must always be the balanced one, the understanding one, the one who never demands too much. They sabotage themselves before asking for help, because asking for help triggers a deep sense of inadequacy, as if they were failing at the role they assumed, even though that role was imposed long ago without them even noticing. And this emotional root is not just theoretical, it shows up in daily decisions. The strong one stays silent even when being treated unfairly, because they don't want to cause conflict. The strong one takes on more work than they should, because they're afraid of seeming weak or incapable. The strong one is constantly saving others from their crises, but never allows themselves to go through a crisis, because to them, the idea of falling is unacceptable. Falling would mean losing the little love and respect they earned by being useful. This creates a vicious cycle where they exhaust themselves just to maintain others' admiration, even if they are collapsing inside. In many cases, this pattern is also fueled by a culture that glorifies limitless resilience, that romanticizes handling everything as if it were a badge of honor. But the human brain wasn't made to live in constant alert. The mind cannot endure years and years of emotional repression without showing symptoms, whether in the form of anxiety, insomnia, body pain, lack of pleasure, irritability, chronic fatigue, or a persistent sense of emptiness. The strong one gets sick, but since they've learned that they can't stop, they keep going and going, until one day the body and mind demand repayment for all that's been silenced for too long. It's essential to understand that this impulse to carry the world didn't come from nowhere. It has a deep emotional origin, and that origin needs to be acknowledged, not to place blame but to liberate. Because only when we see the roots of our emotional exhaustion can we begin to cut the patterns that hold us back. Being strong may have been the only option you had as a child, but now as an adult, you can choose something different. You can choose to be whole. And being whole also means being vulnerable, being flawed, being human. No one should be reduced to the role of a pillar. You're not just support, you are a person, with limits, with stories, with pain that also deserves to be seen. The kind of strength that matters isn't the one that suppresses everything. It's the one that allows itself to be authentic. And authenticity doesn't align with forced roles. It aligns with freedom, with the permission to say, I'm tired too. When the mind isn't heard, the body speaks. And when the body isn't listened to, it screams. People who live in the role of being too strong, those who suppress their emotions, swallow their tears and force themselves to handle everything, often live with nameless aches, fatigue that never goes away, and symptoms no test can explain. It's the body trying to say what the mouth can no longer bear. The headache that won't stop, the recurring insomnia, the tightness in the chest, the frequent forgetfulness, the constant muscle tension, the gut that's always out of balance, the feeling of being constantly on high alert. These are not weaknesses, they are alarms, desperate attempts from the body to show that carrying the weight of the world comes with a very real and deep physiological cost. Neuroscience shows that chronic stress alters brain chemistry. People who live under constant pressure to appear strong have elevated cortisol levels for extended periods, which negatively affects sleep, memory, immunity, mood, and even the cardiovascular system. The toll comes not just emotionally, but biologically. The body of someone who never switches off, who never relaxes, who never allows themselves to just be, becomes ill. And often, this illness is mistaken for bad luck, for physical weakness, or even for laziness, when in reality, it's the soul's accumulated exhaustion, a silent collapse no one sees because the appearance remains intact. The cruelest part of this dynamic is that on the outside, everything looks fine. The strong one keeps smiling, meeting deadlines, helping everyone, staying functional. But inside, there is a silent erosion, slowly draining their strength. Each day, a little less energy, a little more emptiness, a feeling that life has become a string of meaningless tasks, an autopilot with no pause button. And when a crisis finally hits, whether it's a panic attack, burnout, or depression disguised as apathy, no one understands. But you seemed so fine, they say. Of course, because the strong one learned how to pretend even when their body can't take it anymore. That's the danger of living in the autopilot of strength. The disconnect between what's felt and what's shown creates an internal abyss that consumes vitality, spontaneity, and the joy of being alive. Everything feels heavy. Even breathing feels like work. Even sleep becomes difficult, because the body can't relax when the mind is at war with its own fragility. And as long as there is fear of stopping, fear of being seen as weak, fear of disappointing others by showing you're not okay, the mind and body will remain in this invisible tug of war until one of them gives out. You can't sustain health without tending to pain. You can't keep the body functioning if the soul is begging for relief, and the most urgent task is not learning how to be even stronger. It's learning how to be human. It's creating inner space for emotions that were once denied. It's developing a new kind of listening, the ability to hear yourself, because as long as you keep ignoring your body's signals, you'll think you need more productivity, more discipline, more self-control, when what you truly need is rest. A pause, a moment of care. You're not exaggerating. You're not making it up. What you feel is real. The exhaustion living in your chest is valid, and it deserves care, not criticism. Your body is not your enemy. It's your ally. And when it begins to scream, it's not because you're failing. It's because you're alive and need to be cared for. And caring for yourself is not selfishness. It's emotional survival. For someone who has spent their whole life being strong, vulnerability doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a threat. It doesn't matter how many books say being vulnerable is beautiful, or how many campaigns talk about mental health. For the strong one, showing weakness activates an internal alarm that is as ancient as it is visceral. Because deep in the psyche, there lives a silent belief: if I fall, no one will catch me. And that's why the strong don't break down, not because they don't feel, not because they don't need to, but because they learned that showing what they feel is dangerous. It can lead to rejection. It can lead to abandonment. It can expose a pain that's been locked away for so long it's become part of their structure. This fear of collapsing comes from real or symbolic experiences where emotional exposure led to pain. Sometimes it began in childhood, where crying was scolded, where showing sadness was met with shame or punishment, where sensitivity was labeled as weakness. Other times, the fear arose in adolescence, after opening their heart to someone and being ridiculed, or in adulthood when vulnerability became ammunition in the wrong hands. After being hurt so many times for being open, the person learns not to open up anymore, and so the only path left is strength, armor, the stance of someone who doesn't need anyone, who's always in control, even when everything inside is falling apart. The problem is that this armor eventually becomes a prison. The strong one becomes a prisoner of their own image. They can't ask for comfort because they're afraid of being seen as fragile. They can't admit they're not okay because they fear disappointing those who admire them. They can't open up because they're afraid people will walk away, and so they live a life where there's only room for the performance of stability, a performance that comes at a high cost. Because when you can't be vulnerable, even with those closest to you, loneliness settles in, even within the most intimate relationships, and that destroys you from the inside. The truth is, vulnerability is not weakness. It's courage. It's emotional maturity. It's the ability to show yourself as you are without the fear of losing love because of it. But for the strong one, this truth isn't felt. It's only understood intellectually. They know they can open up, but they can't do it. Because to get there, they'd have to dismantle years of emotional survival. They'd have to touch wounds buried beneath layers of efficiency and control. They'd need courage not just to speak, but to feel. And feeling hurts. Feeling shakes things up. Feeling disorganizes a structure built specifically to keep everything in place. But the moment always comes, and it always does, when holding everything alone is no longer possible. The body has already given signs. The mind is overwhelmed. The soul is begging for truth. And at that point, the only healthy way out is to allow yourself to fall, even just a little, even if it's just to say, "I'm not okay." That won't destroy you. That will set you free. Because only when pain is acknowledged can it begin to heal. Only when the truth is spoken can the heart find rest. And only when vulnerability is welcomed can real connection happen. Being strong doesn't mean being made of steel. It means being whole. And being whole includes accepting your most fragile, most sensitive, most human parts. You don't have to fall apart in front of everyone, but you do need to stop hiding from yourself. The pain you don't show still exists, and the more you repress it, the louder it screams. Maybe the greatest act of strength in your life won't be holding it all together, but finally allowing yourself to feel. There is a kind of loneliness that isn't measured by how many people are around, but by the absence of genuine listening. And no one knows this loneliness better than the one who was chosen, consciously or not, to be the pillar of the family, the group, or the relationship. These people are seen as unshakable, and precisely because of that, they're forgotten when it comes time to care. Everyone rushes to unload their pain on the strong one. Everyone vents, cries, releases. But who listens to the strong one? Who truly asks how they're doing? Who notices when they go quiet, when the light in their eyes fades, when their body begins to give out? This loneliness is cruel because it's silent. There's no blatant abandonment. No one turns their back. But no one really gets close with a sincere desire to understand what's happening behind all that strength either. People assume the strong are fine simply because they seem fine. But that appearance is often a cry for help disguised as competence. It's the last barrier before collapse. Yet the strong one has learned that expressing pain doesn't help, or worse, it makes others uncomfortable. So they avoid it. They'd rather suffer quietly than be a burden. They'd rather put out everyone else's fires than light their own way. And in doing so, they slowly disappear inside themselves. What hurts the most is realizing that this lack of care isn't out of cruelty. The people around genuinely believe the strong one doesn't need it. They think he's so mature, she's always so grounded, he never falls apart. And because of this, they stop offering the most essential thing, emotional support. The strong one starts to be seen as a resource, not a human being. They become a reference point, a support beam, a foundation. But no one sees them as someone who also feels fear, who also cries, who also has bad days. And when the strong one finally breaks, everyone is shocked, as if no one ever imagined that fragility could exist there, as if their pain didn't fit into the role they were given. That's the trap of being the pillar. You hold up everything, but no one holds you. And over time, this generates a deep existential exhaustion, a desire to disappear, not out of drama, not out of neediness, but out of emotional fatigue. Because staying whole all the time, without being heard, without exchange, without care, is unbearable. Human beings were made to share, to be seen, to have someone to help carry the weight of existence. And when that doesn't happen, the soul begins to wither. It hardens, it turns into a desert where even your own emotions can no longer bloom. We need to talk about this. We need to remember that even the strongest need care, that no one should live only as the listener, that everyone deserves to be asked, "And how are you really?" With sincerity, with presence, with pause. Sometimes a simple question saves someone from collapse. Sometimes a mindful gaze prevents a fall. And the strong one, behind all the strength, dreams of that too. Of a moment when they can just be, without having to hold up the world. A moment when they can be fragile and still be loved. You weren't made to carry everything alone. You have the right to be cared for. The right to exist beyond your usefulness. The right to be seen when you're not okay. And if the world hasn't learned that from you, maybe it's time to teach it. Start by stopping. Start by speaking. Start by saying that you need support too. Because even the strongest pillar cracks when it stays silent for too long. There are types of exhaustion that don't go away with a good night's sleep. There are pains that no test can explain. And there are voids that settle into the hearts of those who have already pushed far beyond their own limits, but still keep saying, "I'm fine." The strong one, the one who always holds it together, the one everyone turns to, the one who takes pride in being dependable, becomes an expert at ignoring the signs. Clear signs that something inside is starting to give. But they learned very early on that feeling is weakness, that stopping is a waste of time, that admitting pain is risking the respect of others. So they keep going. They go beyond themselves, beyond where they should go. And the further they go, the less they realize they've long passed the threshold of emotional exhaustion. The first sign is usually subtle. Pleasure fades. Things that once brought joy now feel dull. A favorite movie, a beloved song, a cherished hug, everything loses color. Then comes the constant fatigue. Waking up tired, living tired, going to bed tired. No matter how long they sleep, the body never feels truly rested. Then come the memory lapses. Small forgettings that signal a mind overloaded. And soon after, the strong one begins to feel irritated by everything. Small stimuli become big annoyances. Noise, simple questions, unexpected touch. Everything feels like an attack, but they swallow it. They take a deep breath, they wear a mask, because to show they're on the verge of collapse would be, to them, to admit failure. This kind of exhaustion isn't exaggeration or drama or all in your head. It's chronic emotional overload. It's the buildup of years of silencing feelings, repressing needs, postponing pain. And the body begins to issue stronger warnings. Muscle pain, gastritis, heart palpitations, anxiety attacks, sudden crying spells, insomnia, loss of appetite or binge eating. But the strong keep moving because they have bills to pay, children to care for, friends to listen to, parents to protect. And in the middle of all this, they forget themselves. They disappear. They become just the gear that keeps everyone else's world turning. The most dangerous part is that the strong one learns to convince themselves that everything is fine. They find reasons for every symptom. It's just a phase. It's too much work. It's normal stress. And so, the signs continue to be ignored until something bigger happens. A collapse, a panic attack in traffic, fainting at work, a crying breakdown in the bathroom, a moment when the air no longer seems to reach the lungs. The mind says, "I can't do this anymore," and the body carries out what the psyche can no longer contain. This cycle must be broken, not to become fragile, but to become whole again. Paying attention to the signs is an act of self-love. It's a gesture of survival. No one was made to function like a machine. The human heart has limits. The mind needs pause. The body needs rest. And the soul, that part of you forgot long ago, is begging to be heard. Because as long as you keep ignoring the warnings, life will keep pushing you toward the edge of total exhaustion. You deserve rest before collapse. You deserve care before pain becomes illness. You deserve to be heard before you have to scream. And the first step may be as simple as admitting to yourself, "I'm not okay, and that's okay." That doesn't make you less capable. That makes you more human. And it's in being human that true strength lives. For someone who learned to be everyone's anchor, asking for help doesn't feel like relief. It feels like intrusion, as if being unwell were a burden to the world, as if taking up the space of someone in need, even for a moment, were an unforgivable transgression. That's how guilt begins. Quiet, almost invisible, but devastating. The strong person feels ashamed of having needs. They feel uncomfortable not being able to handle it all, and often they punish themselves for feeling what they feel. There are people with bigger problems, they say. "I don't want to worry anyone," they think, and in doing so they erase themselves. They pull away from everything that could heal them: affection, support, connection. The root of that guilt runs deep. At some point in life, these people internalize the belief that their worth is directly tied to their independence. If they're useful, they're loved. If they're vulnerable, they're a burden. And society reinforces this constantly. The culture of productivity, of overcoming at any cost, of emotional meritocracy. Everything screams that asking for help is weakness, failure, dependency. So the strong pretend to be fine. They say they don't need anything. They smile even when everything is falling apart inside. And when, for some reason, they finally open their mouth to say, "Help me," they do so with their soul curled in, already bracing for rejection, judgment, or pity. The problem is that guilt distorts reality. It creates a filter through which the strong one convinces themselves that being vulnerable is disruptive. So even when they find people willing to help, they sabotage it. They retreat. They minimize their pain, change the subject, laugh at themselves, and with that, they close the door that, for a brief moment, had cracked open. Guilt convinces them that love is conditional upon being functional, that if they have nothing to offer, it's better to disappear. This thought isn't logical and it's emotional, and unless it's faced head-on, it will continue to operate as an internal saboteur of every attempt at self-care. Asking for help is an act of courage, and more than that, it's a right. No one is born to be an eternal pillar. No one was meant to meet everyone's needs while being met by no one. You have the right to fall, to need, to not be okay. And those who truly love you will understand that. They'll be there, they'll listen without judging, they'll care without conditions. But for that to happen, you have to break through the wall of guilt. You have to accept that you too deserve what you give, that you too need to be supported, and that yes, your pain matters, even if it's not the worst in the world. And if no one ever taught you that before, now is the time to learn. Real love doesn't depend on your usefulness. It exists even on the days you're broken, lost, or exhausted. And if you haven't yet found that kind of love, maybe the first step is offering it to yourself. A bit of compassion, a bit of gentleness, a bit of permission, because the guilt that keeps you from asking for help isn't yours. It was planted, but you can uproot it. You can break the cycle. You can, for the first time, simply say, I need help too. Asking for help doesn't make you smaller. It makes you real. And only what is real can be truly loved. There's a kind of love that seems beautiful on the surface, but deep down is a disguised form of self-denial. It's the kind of love that cares for everyone, except itself, that gives without limits, that anticipates others' pain, that fixes, consoles, organizes, holds everything together. At first glance it looks noble, and often it's admired, but at its core it's an inverted kind of love, because it happens at the cost of one's own existence. People who live in this emotional pattern learned, consciously or not, that loving means forgetting themselves, that tending to others is more important than listening to their own pain, and that being needed is the only way to feel worthy of affection. This inverted love has roots in the childhood of those who had to earn emotional space through performance. Children who, instead of receiving unconditional love, were praised for being good, well-behaved, helpful, who learned to decode adults' moods to keep the household atmosphere light, who discovered that if they did everything right, they might receive a little affection. The problem is that this logic gets internalized, and when these children grow up, they become adults who specialize in caring, not because they want to, but because they feel they have to, because they believe they're only lovable when they're giving themselves entirely. Over time, this pattern erodes their sense of identity. They no longer know what they feel, because they're constantly absorbing everyone else's pain. They no longer know what they want, because they're always meeting others' needs. They no longer know where others end and they begin. It's as if their entire existence is molded around others, and when they step away from that dynamic, they feel guilt, emptiness, disconnection, because self-abandonment became a habit, a comfort zone, a way of existing. But little by little, this way of loving starts to take a toll. Resentment, loneliness, burnout, and a deep feeling of invisibility. The cruelest part of this dynamic is that the world rarely notices. Often, those around them get used to this love that gives everything and begin to take it for granted. The caregiver becomes a source of support, not someone to support, a reference, not a priority. And then, when they finally need something in return, they realize their presence was never seen as human, only as functional. That's when the collapse comes. The feeling that all the love they gave never came back. That no one notices when they're unwell. That if they stop giving, they vanish. This logic needs to be reversed. Healthy love is not self-denial. Loving others only makes sense when it doesn't demand abandoning yourself. Caring also means setting boundaries, saying no, recognizing your own exhaustion, and most of all, treating yourself with the same tenderness you offer others. You don't need to stop loving others, but you do need to learn to love yourself too, to put yourself on your own list of priorities, to look at yourself with the same care you give to those you protect. Because if your love requires you to disappear, it's a love that is unwell. And you weren't made to disappear. You were made to exist fully. And if that sounds selfish, maybe it's because you were taught to call selfish what is, in truth, survival. Taking care of yourself is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's a responsibility. It's the only way to keep loving others without losing yourself in the process. Because real love doesn't demand self-abandonment. It demands presence. And you can only be truly present if you also exist in the care. There are pains that don't scream. They hide. They fold in, adjust, camouflage themselves in smiles and rehearsed phrases, and no one notices. Because the strong one is a master at storing their pain in secret compartments of the soul, inner places no one can access, not even themselves. It's not that they don't feel, they feel everything, but they feel in silence. They feel it in their skin, their back, their stomach, their bones. They feel it in sleepless nights and dragged-out days. They feel it in the emptiness that grows even when surrounded by people. But they don't speak, not out of pride, out of habit, because they've been conditioned to believe their pain is smaller or must be resolved alone, or that there's no safe space where it can land without creating chaos. The strong one learn to organize their pain like someone tidying a drawer. They shove it all inside, force it shut, and go on with life as if nothing's out of place. Sometimes they even forget what they stored there. But the body doesn't forget. The mind doesn't forget. Emotions, no matter how deeply asleep, keep vibrating in the backstage of consciousness. And over time, that internal drawer fills up so much that it begins to leak. It leaks in the form of impatience, of lost motivation, of small everyday breakdowns. It leaks through outbursts without clear reason, through laughter that hides tears, through forgetfulness that reveals overload. Storing pain is a form of emotional survival. When there's no safe space to express what's felt, the only path left is to tuck it away. But there's a cost. Because no repressed emotion disappears, it only changes shape. Fear becomes control, sadness becomes apathy, anger becomes self-demand, and self-love becomes a distant memory. Over time, the strong one becomes someone who doesn't even allow themselves to feel joy fully, afraid that any intense feeling might unlock those tightly sealed compartments. They live in the middle ground, not happy, not sad, just functional. This silence is deafening. And often invisible. The strong one continues to be praised for their resilience, for their maturity, for their stability. No one suspects that behind all that strength lives a soul exhausted from carrying so much without ever sharing it. Stored pain is lonely because it has no echo, and the strong one no longer knows how to talk about it. Words fade, emotional vocabulary crumbles, and the only apparent option is to keep going, even when the body and heart are begging for a pause. It takes courage to open those internal drawers, to face the mess that's been hidden for so long, to admit that even being strong, you're still hurting. And that's okay. No one comes out of life untouched. No one holds it together forever. Speaking about pain won't destroy you. It will rebuild you. It will free you from the prison of having to seem okay all the time. And it will remind you that you don't have to carry it all alone. There is lightness after confession. There is healing after being heard. And there is love wherever truth is allowed to live. You have the right to show yourself, to name what hurts, to take off the armor for a moment and simply breathe, because your pain is valid, even if hidden, even if disguised, and it deserves to be seen, not judged. The fortress you built may have been necessary, but now maybe it's time to open a crack, so that air can come in, so that life can come in, so that you can come in, for real. There's a kind of injustice that doesn't show up in fights, in shouting, or in open conflict. It lives in the subtle imbalances of relationships. It happens when everyone leans on you, but no one offers you a shoulder. When people seek you out for advice, comfort, help, but disappear when you're the one struggling. When your pain is silently considered less urgent than everyone else's. It's the injustice of being the universal support, too strong to be helped, too present to be prioritized, too available to be noticed. This kind of emotional imbalance isn't just exhausting, it's corrosive, because it slowly eats away at your sense of personal worth. It makes you wonder if people love you for who you are, or just for what you give. The truth is, relationships like this don't happen by accident. They are built on old, often invisible patterns. The strong one was always trained to erase themselves, to show up before being asked, to anticipate what others need. And over time, the people around them get used to it. They begin to take it for granted. They start treating that generosity as obligation, and that's how emotional imbalance is born. One that feels normal, but isn't. It's unfair that you're always the one listening, but never the one being heard. It's unfair that your falls are ignored while you run to lift others. It's unfair that you're always there, but no one knows where you go to cry. This kind of injustice is even more cruel because it's hard to name. There are no proofs, no loud words, no obvious gestures, just absence, just silence, just that cold emptiness that settles in when you realize no one notices your absence. No one sees your sadness, no one truly asks how you're doing, and that's when pain turns into resentment, when exhaustion turns into bitterness, when love, once so spontaneous, begins to feel like a bitter duty, something you carry by habit, not desire. It takes courage to see this pattern, because it hurts. It shatters the image you built that handling everything is a virtue. It exposes how much of yourself you've sacrificed in the name of others. But it's also in this awareness that transformation begins. When you realize you deserve reciprocity, that you deserve to be held too, that you deserve relationships where love is not a transaction, but a two-way street, where you can fall and be caught, where your pain is heard with the same care you give others, where your existence is enough, even when you're not available. Breaking free from the role of being everyone's pillar doesn't mean abandoning the ones you love. It just means learning to include yourself in the equation. It means no longer accepting relationships where love flows in only one direction. It means starting to say, today, I'm the one who needs support. And if the people around you don't know how to handle that, maybe they never really saw you. Maybe they just got used to your functional version. But you're more than functional. You're human. And humans need support, need comfort, need care. You weren't made to carry everyone and be carried by no one. Seeking balance isn't selfish, it's emotional justice. And you deserve justice, even in the relationships you love most. Few phrases hurt as much as the one said casually, yet loaded with emotional neglect. You can handle it, right? It comes burdened with a cruel expectation that your pain doesn't matter, that your resilience justifies the lack of care, that you, by being strong, are supposed to endure more than others all the time. This phrase, disguised in fake affection, hides an uncomfortable truth. Your suffering has been normalized. Your strength has been used as an excuse for the absence of listening. Your ability to keep going has become a reason for no one to care about the weight you carry. It's as if you've been placed on a pedestal of endurance, and from up there, no one believes you could ever fall. The normalization of suffering begins subtly. People ask too many favors, demand endless understanding, talk about themselves without asking about you. And at first, you accept it. After all, you've always been good at handling pressure. But over time, this dynamic settles in. People stop noticing your limits. They stop acknowledging your pain. They stop seeing you as someone who feels too. And when at last you dare to show you're tired, you hear something like, but you're so strong, why? As if being strong meant not feeling, as if your humanity had been erased by the emotional performance you learned to deliver. This kind of emotional invisibility generates a quiet kind of burnout, because while everyone around you expects you to hold it all together, you begin to erase yourself. You stop saying no, you swallow tears, you smile out of duty, and the most dangerous part, you start believing your pain really doesn't matter that much, that you have to handle it, that it can't be drama or weakness. But every human has a limit, and so do you, even if you pretend not to see it. Even if others pretend not to hear it, normalizing someone else's pain is a form of silent emotional violence, and it often happens to those who never complain, who are always smiling, who never fall apart. Because in a distorted social logic, those who don't scream must not be suffering. But that's false. The strong also suffer. The strong also fall ill. The strong also need care. But they learn to do it in hiding, and the world takes advantage of that silence. It's time to dismantle this narrative. You don't need to prove your pain to be worthy of care. You don't need to be shattered to deserve attention. And above all, you don't need to accept the unfair expectation that you must endure everything all the time. It is valid to say, I can't take it anymore. It is valid to pull away to protect yourself. It is valid to demand care. Because your pain isn't smaller just because you've learned to disguise it well. It is real, it is worthy, and it deserves space. Refuse the role of the one who only endures. Reclaim your right to feel, to need, to exist beyond strength, because no one was born to be everyone else's hero while bleeding in silence. There is a day no one expects, not even the strong one. A day when the body, mind, and soul all say together, enough. It's the moment when the hero breaks. Not by choice, but because there's no more internal space left to keep pretending that everything is fine. That day doesn't come with warning signs. It doesn't arrive with banners or forecasts. Sometimes it happens in the middle of a meeting, in the kitchen, during a silly conversation. Suddenly everything that's been piled up for years, the swallowed disappointments, the silenced heartbreaks, the ignored cries for help, all of it collapses at once, and the strong one falls apart, quietly or loudly, on their knees or with a scream, in tears or in a silence no one understands, but they fall. Because even those who seem made of steel have a breaking point. This breaking is not weakness, it's not drama, it's not exaggeration, it's accumulation, it's overload. It's the result of a life spent holding up others while no one asked who was holding you. It's the collapse of a structure that looked unshakable on the outside, but had been crumbling inside for a long time. In that moment, the hero who always saved everyone realizes they can no longer be only that. That it's no longer possible to be everything to everyone and nothing to themselves. That you can't keep holding up the world without having a place to lay your own head. The cruelest part is that this collapse often comes hand in hand with guilt. Guilt for no longer being able to pretend. Guilt for disappointing others. Guilt for becoming what they swore they'd never be. Someone who needs help. But that guilt is also part of the same system that always forced you to be stronger than necessary. It's not yours. It was planted. It's the voice of exhaustion trying to silence you again, but not this time. Now is the time to listen, to embrace, to care for the most forgotten part of yourself, the one that always needed a place to rest. The hero's breaking can be devastating, yes, but it can also be the beginning of a much more truthful rebuilding, because for the first time, the strong one is forced to see themselves as human. And in that moment, they discover that there's life beyond performance, that there's love even in imperfection. That connection is possible even without armor, that there's beauty in being vulnerable. The pain of the fall is real, but it makes room for a new way of existing, more honest, more gentle, more free. You didn't fail because you broke. You set yourself free because no one was made to endure everything. No one was born to be a hero all the time. And if the world demands that of you, the mistake isn't in you. It's in the world that glorifies strength and neglects fragility. But now, you can choose a different path. A path where your pain has space, where your exhaustion is respected, where you can finally rest, and maybe for the first time discover that being cared for is also a form of being loved. After the breaking point comes the silence. And it is in this silence, without the pressure to hold anyone else up, without the obligation to look okay, without the armor tightening around your chest, that something new begins to emerge. A timid, almost uncomfortable realization at first. I also deserve care. For someone who has spent their whole life taking care of everyone else, this idea feels strange. It feels selfish. It feels like a luxury never allowed. But little by little, this feeling begins to feel familiar. The world slows down, and in the middle of the exhaustion, a forgotten truth resurfaces. No one was born to carry everything alone. No one needs to be strong all the time to be worthy of love. And maybe it's not necessary to die inside just to finally be seen. This awakening isn't magical. It doesn't happen overnight. It arrives slowly, like a breeze after a storm. It comes through small gestures, someone who asks how you are and actually waits for the answer. Someone who notices your absence, someone who listens without rushing. At first, you don't believe it. You think it's out of politeness, that it won't last. But little by little, you start to experience a new way of existing, a way where you don't have to prove your usefulness at all times, where you can simply be vulnerable, be contradictory, be imperfect, and still be loved. This discovery might come in an unexpected hug, in a therapy session, in a conversation that deeply moves you, in a moment of solitude where for the first time you hear your own voice without judgment. The most important thing is that for the first time you begin to see yourself not as a role, but as a person with a story, with limits, with fatigue, and more than that, with the right to be embraced. Because love can't be a reward for those who endure the most. It has to be a safe place for those who simply exist. Being cared for doesn't mean being weak, it means being human. And accepting that care doesn't lessen your strength, it expands it. Because true strength isn't about never falling, but about knowing who reaches out their hand when you do. It's about recognizing that just as you've always been there for others, there are people who can be there for you too. And if for now that person hasn't shown up yet, let that awakening begin within yourself. Learn to give yourself what you never received. Patience, compassion, warmth. Allow yourself to be cared for. Allow yourself to rest. Allow yourself to be someone who, even after holding up the world for so long, now chooses to hold on to themselves just a little longer, because no one is born ready for everything, but everyone deserves someone and somewhere where they can finally just be who they are. Behind the resistance to showing vulnerability lies a deeply rooted belief that falling is failure, that giving in means losing respect, that showing pain is like signing a certificate of incompetence. But this idea, so widespread, so present in everyday discourse, is a lie, a cruel lie that traps thousands of people in a life based on performance, where there's only room for strength, stability, and constant resilience. But no one can take it forever. No one can carry it all endlessly. And at some point, the moment comes to reclaim what we were denied from the beginning: the right to fall, the right to be vulnerable, the right not to handle everything. Because vulnerability is not weakness, it's freedom. Vulnerability is what happens when we stop pretending, when we let go of control, when we admit there is fear, sadness, confusion, doubt, anger, exhaustion. It's the moment we take off the mask and reveal our skin, when we stop performing stability just to finally exist, fully. And it is in this wholeness that life begins again, that connections stop being superficial, that love no longer depends on performance. Because it's only when we show who we truly are that we give others the chance to love us completely, not just for the parts that please, help, or support. Society often romanticizes strength but dismisses surrender. It praises those who endure but avoids those who feel. This creates a toxic emotional model where only resistance is valued. But resistance, when it becomes automatic, is also a form of avoidance. Avoiding ourselves, avoiding pain, avoiding the fear of being truly seen. But there is no healing in avoidance. Healing only begins when we have the courage to fall, not in front of the world, but in front of ourselves. To look in the mirror and say, I don't need to be unbreakable, I need to be real. To fall in this context doesn't mean giving up, it means breathing. It means reconnecting. It means no longer fighting against our own humanity. And when you allow yourself to do this, you discover that the ground is not a place of shame. It's a place of restart. It's where we reorganize, where we rediscover gentleness, where we look inward with less judgment and more compassion, where, for the first time, the chance is born to build a life that doesn't depend on applause but on presence, a life where simply existing is enough. You don't have to hold everything all the time. You have the right to let go, to falter, to need, to cry, and most importantly, to be embraced anyway. Vulnerability doesn't take away your worth. It reveals your true value. The value of being human, the value of feeling, the value of no longer needing to fake strength in order to deserve love. You don't have to prove yourself anymore. You can fall. And falling might be, paradoxically, the most courageous act of your life. After the fall, after admitting the pain, after breaking the silence, comes what many don't expect: the chance to begin again. To begin with a new perspective, a new rhythm, a new awareness. To begin without having to prove anything, without the need to carry the world, without the obligation to appear unshakable. Because now, for the first time in a long while, you understand. Being strong is not about being invulnerable. Being strong is being whole, and being whole includes flaws, doubts, breakdowns, fears, all the things you've tried to hide for so long. True strength is born from self-acceptance, not from denying your own fragilities. Relearning how to live is a subtle but profound process. It begins by saying no without guilt, by accepting help without feeling less than, by recognizing that your pain doesn't have to be the worst in the world to deserve care. It means realizing that you're not alive just to function, but to feel, to be present, to connect with others in a genuine way, not just as their support. And this process is slow, because it requires breaking years of conditioning. But with every small choice, sleeping a bit more, pausing the autopilot, asking for a hug, canceling a plan out of exhaustion, something inside you begins to heal, to rebuild, to be set free. Living with this new awareness doesn't mean you'll stop being strong. On the contrary, you'll become even stronger, but in a different way. A strength that doesn't demand rigidity, but flexibility. That comes not from control, but from connection. That isn't built on self-denial, but on the truth of who you are. A strength that doesn't need applause or external validation, because it is rooted in self-care, internal compassion, and respect for your own limits. This is the kind of strength that sustains, not drains, that protects without imprisoning, that leads without crushing. You can still care for others. You can love, support, serve, but now, without losing yourself, without abandoning yourself, without disappearing into the role of always being the strong one, because now you know no one deserves to dim their own light to brighten the path for everyone else. Your light matters too. Your peace is also a priority. Your rest is sacred. May this new way of living stay with you. May you remember every day that the world won't collapse if you stop, that those who truly love you will still love you even on the days when you're not strong, and that your greatest strength from now on won't be the ability to endure everything, but the courage to finally live with lightness, with truth, with freedom. Because life doesn't ask for perfection, it asks for presence, and you, being whole, are already more than enough.